Hey guys, this is DCHL Alex, and I have a special introduction of a new army, the Heroes of Mirkwood. That's right in front of me on this nice display board. Very intricate army to paint. I have to say the molds are very detailed. We have the Mirkwood Cavalry, the Mirkwood Elves with shield and sword. We have the Mirkwood Elves with glaives, and the Mirkwood Elves with bows. And then for heroes on the top ledge, we have the Mirkwood Captain, Tariel Exile version, and Legolas, and of course Thranduil in the top corner. As far as painting these, it was not easy. I do hate fine cast. Very brittle. They broke, especially the Mirkwood Cavalry models. They were extremely tough to put together. I broke them probably 20 times. All together. The tails, the swords broke, but the painting was fun though. I went with kind of an autumn, like dark color scheme. So I'll just show you all the cloaks in this army are a Xandri dust, like that tan color, and then Agrax Earthshade, and then I took white and just lightly brushed all the edges, and then the front, I used a lot of Balthasar gold, I believe it is, and then the regular silver. I forgot the name of it. But yeah, they came out very nice. Kind of a dark autumn kind of feel to them. And even the Mirkwood bows, I really like the pose of some of these. And again, I went with that dark tone. They almost look like evil. An evil force, but in a way the new Mirkwood elves are kind of evil. They keep to themselves, hidden behind their borders. So, but I'm going to turn it over to Devin, who's going to talk about how to play this force. I just wanted to give you guys a close-up.
Hey guys, this is DCHL Devin here, and I hope you guys liked the display that Alex gave. This is actually an army that is really near and dear to his heart, and for good reason. It's an awesome army, extremely good on the battlefield, and really, really good to look at. Plus the fact that it's an extremely rare force, so I imagine many of you guys are going to want to collect it just so you can get that unique feel in the battlefield. Why collect that Gondor force that almost everybody has when you can have these guys? Just an elven force that almost nobody has ever seen. So now that we've seen the paint schemes he's used, let's get into how to play them. The first thing we should talk about is that this is not an easy army to play. Although a beginner would be wanting to gravitate toward this type of force, it actually is extremely difficult, and I'd only recommend it after you're used to the game for a little bit. Now, as far as strengths go for the Mirkwood force, we're only going to talk about Thranduil's halls. Now, granted, during this video, I might include some of the older Mirkwood models, such as the Sentinels and the Wood Elf Warriors, which actually should be included if you're going to do an entire force of these. But for now, I'll just focus on the models that are in Thranduil's halls when I'm talking about the strengths and weaknesses and overall how to play the force. Now, regarding strengths, obviously, when you're talking about elves, you're always going to hear high fight and high courage, and this army is no exception. This army has an average fight of 5. However, unlike the other elves, this army actually outfights elves. So when going against an elven force, if you use the Palace Guard around Thranduil, the Palace Guard will actually outfight anything that they throw against them. Plus, some of the elven heroes have fight 7, which is pretty unheard of unless you're fielding Gil-galad or Glorfindel. So many of even your best elven heroes can outfight some of the best elven heroes that the other armies have to offer. The next one is that this army tends to be pretty decent against hoarding factions. Now, the reason for this is mostly the Rangers that you see up the top. The Rangers for this force can easily outfight many goblin hordes, especially if they tend to surround them. The Night Fighters rule is new to the Lord of the Rings Middle-earth game, and it allows them to add an attack every time they're surrounded by more than one model. Now, this doesn't include spear supports, so I wouldn't throw them up against the phalanx or anything like that, but using this, they can be really good against models that just like to swarm and trap them, as since their high fight value will pretty much dominate almost any hoarding force on the game. Now, the next thing we got to talk about is shooting. Unlike any other elven force, except for maybe the Rivendell Knights, which are too expensive to capitalize on this anyway, the Mirkwood Thranduil's Hall's army has an excellent shooting capability, basically. The Rangers have a 100% limit when fielded with Thranduil, Legolas, or Tauriel. And obviously, when you're taking a Thranduil's Halls list, you're going to take these three. There's really no ifs, ands, or but about it. So you're going to have a lot more bows than the opponent. Now, this on top of the fact that you're shooting elven bows with elven accuracy, you can talk about some of the best shooting in the game. When talking about shooting, we also have to mention the fact that the old Thranduil, which I do recommend you use once in a while, can actually field Mirkwood elves with a 2-up shoot value. So you can actually get a better shoot value than is possible in any other faction in the game. The Rangers also do a pretty good job at shooting as well. However, since they also fulfill a great close combat role, you can expect that even when the battle lines meet, after shooting tons of volleys at your opponent, you're going to do just fine in close combat as well. This makes this force unique in the fact that its archers actually function as close combat warriors as well. Now, when talking about the warriors of this army, the best part about it is that the warriors fulfill multiple functions. As mentioned just previously, the Rangers can shoot and fight in close combat. Also, they can technically be an anti-cav force since they are armed with elven cloaks. If you hide them behind the trees, they're going to shoot down cavalry, and the cav models will have to get in 6 inches in order to charge them, which allows the Rangers to charge first. Palace Guard function as a bodyguard unit, an excellent one at that. They can charge terrifying models, but at the same time, when around Thranduil, they can also function as an anti-hero role. Also, when you're talking about the regular warriors, you can be armed with Mirkwood Glaives. This is actually a new weapon in the arsenal of the Wood Elves, and it allows you to use shielding rules, the Elven Blade rule, and the Spear Support rule at the same time. So as you can see, this is a multi-functioning army that can pretty much fulfill any type of role it needs with only one warrior. And this is an awesome advantage that Thranduil's Halls has. Now, with all these amazing benefits of the Thranduil's Halls race, we have to kind of wonder, okay, what are the weaknesses of these guys? And the one biggest complaint that anyone can have with this army is the fact that they rely on heroes entirely for most of their benefits. The Rangers only get their 100% shoot value when fielded with Legolas, Tauriel, or Thranduil. Also, the Cav models that you have only get some of their benefits that, by the way, you're forced to pay for if they're around Thranduil. So once Thranduil is defeated or is removed from them, then they lose benefits that you are paying points for. Also, the Palace Guard have this exact same problem. In order to get that fight of 6 that allows them to take on other heroes in the army and other armies, you're going to have to be once again around Thranduil. It's kind of an annoying problem when fighting with this army is the fact that all someone has to do is separate your main heroes from your main warriors, and you're going to suffer more issues. Another problem with this army is the fact that it has extremely weak defense. In fact, probably almost the most fragile in the game, minus the Goblin Town Goblins. You're talking about a defense of 3 and 4 by default, and you're never going to get above defense 5 unless you field Thranduil, and he's only a defense 6. In a game now that is littered with strength 4 models, defense 6 is not cutting it. So most of your heroes, as amazing as they are, can be easily brought down if you ever lose a single combat. Now, granted, the benefit is that Thranduil and Tauriel and Legolas have tons of attacks and a lot of fight value that allow them to almost never lose combats, plus the mix of elven cloaks, which allows them to not be shot. However, if you do lose combat, you should guarantee yourself that your warriors will be hurt heavily. Even your Mirkwood Rangers have this serious problem. When you're talking about Mirkwood Rangers, you're talking about 3 defense. You're paying a huge amount of points for a warrior that, if it ever loses combat, will die. It's almost guaranteed. Even your Cav and your Palace Guard will not hold out very long against an army with superior strength. If the army is of average strength, then they can still take you down in a relatively quick speed if they start to win combats. So when playing this army, it's extremely important to make sure your opponent does not have an equal chance of killing you as you do them. You need to make sure you always have the edge, which unfortunately leads into our next problem. Especially when we're talking about Mirkwood, we're also talking about one of the smallest elven forces of all the elves. The Mirkwood Thranduil's Hall's army is a finesse race by more means than anybody else. you're going to be overwhelmed even by a superior force that is also supposed to be very small, like Isengard or any other like that. You're still going to be paying more points for most of your elites and more points for most of your basic warriors than the basic warriors of other armies. So you're really going to have to play to your strengths. When you have a lot of rangers, you're going to need to shoot with them as much as possible to mitigate numbers. And also you're going to have to take advantage of your heroes and hit the army right in just a way that you can capitalize on all your best strengths. So another thing about this that you're going to face is your weak strength value. Unfortunately, except for your heroes, one problem with all elven armies is that you're not going to get above strength 3. Strength 3 is in no way going to help you against a defense 6 army. You're going to have a lot of problems. So if you're fighting the likes of dwarves, you're really going to start to suffer, especially as your strength 3 bows even seem to bounce off of them. So this is really a problem that you're going to face quite often. You'll learn how to mitigate this as you learn how to play the army, which I will teach you now. Alright, so when playing this army, we'll have to note the first thing you're going to want to pick is your hero. This army plays extremely differently depending on the type of hero that you actually choose. The old Thranduil is going to play differently than the new one, and they're actually going to have different bonuses toward their warriors. So if you're going to want a more shooty force, you're definitely going to want to pick Tauriel and Legolas, of course. Thranduil is good, however, he lends himself more toward a combat style of play. The biggest mistake I've often seen a lot of new guys make is to pick way too many elite choices in this army. You need to make sure that you mix the elites with your Mirkwood warriors. Now, what do I mean by this? I'm talking about the Palace Guard and the Rangers. A lot of people will start off, and because especially the Rangers and the Palace Guard are made of plastic, and they sell for a lot less than the Warriors, oftentimes you'll see people just running lists of Warriors and Palace Guard. The problem with this is you're going to have about 10 to 20 Warriors when your opponent has easily triple that amount. It's going to be a serious problem. Even with all the softening up with arrows, you just simply won't win. It's going to be extremely difficult. You're going to have to hit your opponent just right, and that will be a really, really big problem for you. So I would absolutely recommend Warriors in this list. In fact, I would often say at least make sure half of your army is Warriors. And by Warriors, I also am including the Mirkwood Cavalry. The cavalry are cheap enough, in fact the cheapest elven cavalry, where you could afford quite a few of them and still feel very comfortable about your points. Also, I wouldn't get too carried away with your heroes. I would probably recommend only about 2, depending on the point size, of course. So maybe at 600 points, stick with about 2. At 800, you could possibly go with 3. And when I say heroes, I'm talking about the main ones rather than captain-type units. Now, after you're done picking all the captains and heroes, we have to focus on a lot of those choices. Now, obviously, you're going to pick some rangers. When you're using your rangers, you want to fire at weaker targets or pinpoint them all toward hard targets. Do not split up your fire if you're shooting at hard targets. So if you're fighting an army full of defense 6, I honestly wouldn't even recommend firing at them. Just go ahead and shoot away at their heroes. Most of the time, even defense 7, which is what most heroes are, will still need a 6 to wound. So if you're going to wound someone, you might as well take out their biggest targets. With all the bow fire that you have, you're bound to at least cause a couple wounds and even maybe potentially kill the target that you're going for. If you're fighting a weaker army, such as Goblin Town or Goblins or anything like that, then go ahead and fire at the swarms. Obviously, those swarms are going to be an issue for you unless you have a lot of rangers, and then we'll talk about how to deploy them against those swarms. When throwing rangers up against swarm armies or any type of army in general, you want to make sure that you use the wheeling tactic. What wheeling is essentially when you make contact with a warrior, you get into their zone of control and you're forced to charge them. However, nothing stops you from continuing to move as long as you still charge the original target. So you hit the first Dune Lending warrior in this example, and then you continue to move until you also hit the second one. Essentially, this is really the only way to multi-charge a model. This is what you want to make sure happens with your rangers, especially if you get priority. If you get priority, you want to try to engage as many as possible and try to avoid spear supports. If you can, maneuver around the spear supports so that way you can also grab them as well. The more people you're in base contact with, the more attacks you get. Also, I would recommend throwing spears behind these guys. Do not send the rangers by themselves. One awesome example I would say is Palace Guard, but obviously you'd probably want to use the higher defense of the Palace Guard in the front. The thing is, you're going to end up winding out having a couple choices. Do you want the Rangers who can get multiple attacks in the front, but have that weak defense where they can easily be killed, or do you want the Palace Guard? My recommendation, if you have Palace Guard with a banner and then someone with a spear behind him, that's a total of 4 attacks, assuming that you're in this exact situation. With a higher fight value of 5 and maybe even 6 if you have Thranduil around him, then you're really not going to lose your fights. Feel free to go ahead and throw the Palace Guard behind the Rangers, or actually just use the Mirkwood Glavemen. If you use them, then you can easily shield and start using other tactics as soon as the Ranger starts to die. So what you don't want to make the mistake of is this exact thing. Don't deploy your Rangers by themselves. They're really going to need the cohesion of the rest of the units in order to support them. It's to make sure that they don't die too quickly in a point where you're losing extremely high expensive warriors faster than you originally intended. Now, another thing to mention with Rangers is the fact that they have Elven Cloaks. The Elven Cloaks allow you to resist cavalry and even shoot at the opponent without being shot back. However, a mistake that some beginners make is to deploy spearmen behind them when doing this. Now, obviously, just a minute ago, I told you to use spearmen, but this is only when close combat actually meets. When you're shooting, you don't want the spearmen behind. The reason why is because the spearmen can still be targeted. Although your Elven Cloaks to protect you from direct fire, if your opponent decides to fire at your back rank and makes a fails their in the way roll, then they're going to hit your Ranger instead. Obviously, this is ideal for them. So they're going to go ahead and fire at your back ranks and then hope that they miss their in the way, hit your Elves instead, and therefore killing them. Because of their weak defense, they're going to go down to bow fire, especially if another Elven bow is involved, which a lot more races may have than you think. Even Gondor and Dwarves can get strength 3 in their bows. So make sure you definitely don't make this mistake. If you're hiding behind the trees, feel free to once again fire at soft targets, and as cavalry are forced to ride up on you, go ahead and engage them. Do not allow cavalry to get this charge unless you're already in difficult terrain. Hiding in difficult terrain is of course ideal, so if you can do that, then certainly feel free. Now, regarding some of the older models that you might see in this game, I'd highly recommend that you actually take a look at them as well. You're talking about, first off, Old Thranduil. One thing that your army does do okay against is cavalry, however, a little too much of them and you might find yourself in a problem situation. The Old Thranduil model, before this one, that new one that came out with 4 attacks, actually has an awesome Nature's Wrath that goes off automatically on a 6. This is probably the best anti-cav model in the game, and the GBHL would even agree, as they've even put it in their magazine, which you should certainly check out for more tactics. Now, with the old models, you're also looking at less expensive Wood Elf warriors. Your Wood Elf warriors here seen are automatically armed with armor. You can't really prevent this, and you're paying a lot of points over time for it. If you want a cheaper option that allows a little bit more spamming, then I would certainly welcome the Wood Elf warriors. Wood Elf warriors are the old Mirkwood elves, so they will fit right into your force with absolutely no issue. Lastly, other than them, I'd probably recommend the Mirkwood Sentinels. Mirkwood Sentinels will allow you to attract targets so that way you can line up with them a little more easily. If your opponent is a little too spaced out for your Rangers to multi-charge them, then go ahead and feel free to move them around. Also, this will help you push them in positions where they didn't want to be. With a finesse army like this, it's extremely helpful to be able to move your opposing forces. Now, regarding the heroes of the Thranduil's Halls race, some of them are kind of almost self-explanatory. Obviously with Tauriel and Thranduil, with their multiple attacks and their ability to gain more attacks if they're surrounded, they do extremely well on their own, which is actually really good and refreshing considering the rest of your army really doesn't want to be in a fight. So feel free to throw Thranduil even by himself against a full phalanx. Now, obviously within reason here. You don't want him to be put in a position where he's completely destroyed. Remember defense 6. If he loses that fight, he's going to have a problem. So I would recommend not fighting him against warriors of equal fight value as him unless you can really avoid it. Can't avoid it. If you're fighting against lesser beings or just a lot of units, like maybe an Isengard Phalanx, honestly, I would have no problem with sending Thranduil against them as long as you have a superior number of attacks to them. You would do that, of course, by attacking at points where you can get more attacks, of course. Now, should you field this guy on a horse? Honestly, he's probably better off dismounted. This might come as surprising to a lot of people. Yes, he has 3 attacks on the horse, which is very good on the charge. Go ahead and put him on a horse, but when he gets dismounted, he is certainly no slouch. I would still recommend go ahead, put him on a horse, but certainly don't hesitate at all to throw him against bowfire or anything else. It's not really going to be too much of an issue unless you're trying to lead a cavalry charge alongside him. Now, as far as Tariel, ignore her bow. Unless you have a situation where your opponent has to come to you, which would probably be the case with a lot of Mirkwood Rangers, you really don't want to bother using her bow. So if you have a situation where you could throw Tariel in close combat, you should do so. She'll never make up her points firing a strength 3 bow at a 3-up accuracy turn after turn, especially when compared to the fact that she absolutely annihilates most other things just by running into combat against them. A lot of mistakes I have seen a lot of beginners make with Tariel is to continue to fire despite the enemy is only 6 inches away. Now, with Legolas, his role is pretty obvious. Most people already know to shoot him. Of course, you must remember that he has a new combat form, and this is probably the form you're going to play him most often in. This one, honestly, self-explanatory. Fire, once again, just like Tariel, until you get into close combat. The only reason I would continue to fire Legolas is if you have the old Legolas. If you have the new one, you must get into combat. If you find almost any beginner, a lot of times they're too comfortable with firing a deadly shot turn after turn or a triple shot when they should be running in with a fight 7, 3 attack, strength 4 warrior. Remember, this army has no strength 4. If you're going up against a defense 6 army, you really need these 3 heroes in combat. Do not be too comfortable with the idea that they can shoot.
Hey guys. Now this is the part of our video where I'm going to go ahead and try to find how to get this army for under $100. A lot of people buying new armies are on a budget, and so it's a really great way to get into the game without having to just throw your entire wallet to get everything you need. Now, unfortunately, I will admit that the Mirkwood Elves, most specifically Thranduil's Halls, are the most expensive army, or one of the most expensive armies in the game, with their elite warriors going at $40 for just 10 of them, and then absurdly their regular warriors going at $25 for only 3. It's going to be an extremely tough army to get. In fact, even their heroes, such as Legolas and Thranduil, are $45 for their mounted versions, and this can be a real struggle, especially considering you're going to need a lot more than this just to play the army. Just to get the normal warriors alone, it would cost you about $100 for a full warband. So it sounds right now, okay, how is this even possible to do at under $100? Well, if you're on a budget, I'm sorry to say, but all the new elves that you're trying to get are not really available to you. This is just an expensive army. It is built for those with money, so if you really like the aesthetics of the army, you might only be able to get 1 or 2 before you find yourself really focusing on more of the old Mirkwood elves rather than new ones. However, if all your interest is just to play the game or even just feel out the style of the army, then you might want to go this route anyway. So what you want to do is kind of find alternatives for what already exists. With Thranduil, one of the best alternatives is the old Thranduil King of Mirkwood model. This model is only $12. He's actually extremely cheap, and I'm guessing the reason why is because a lot of people are going to gravitate toward the new Thranduil model. Even if you really want a Thranduil model that is looking more like the movie version, then you could go toward the $20 Thranduil model that Games Workshop also sells. Now, he's not really in any type of combat pose, and I suppose if you want one, they do have one available, though most would agree he looks extremely awkward, and I'd be surprised if Games Workshop sold even one of these guys. So, yeah, start with the Thranduil King of Mirkwood. If you want Tariel, really your only option is to get Tariel. I mean, you could try to find some female ranger, and you could actually do that within the box of Mirkwood Elves. So if you want a cheap Tariel version, one option is to do that. However, Tariel is so iconic, and her pose and dynamics on the figure itself is so good that I honestly would really say just go ahead and fork out the $25. But if you're really on a budget, then what you could do is actually just buy a box of Mirkwood Mirkwood Rangers, and then paint one of their hair orange, like just a bright orange. Obviously, there's a lot of females in the group, as you can see. And it wouldn't be too difficult to get one of these to be Tariel. In fact, this miniature here, I think, would be probably the best one to use. So if you really want to go that route, then you get $40. You get basically 9 Rangers and a Tariel model. So that's one less Ranger, but a free Tariel, which, subtracts $25. So I guess you could say that this Ranger pack is $15. I can imagine that a lot of people wouldn't mind that price. So another way to do this, if you want to get an alternative for the Mirkwood Warriors, then you're going to have to go really Galadrim. Now, Galadrim actually look very similar. It's only really the helmets and the capes. Capes are not hard to mold a little bit, but the helmets it could be a little difficult, but honestly, just paint the army kind of an autumn color. Really, the big difference between Mirkwood and Galadrim is that the Mirkwood army has steel-colored armor, and their capes are a different color, and that's really about it. Some of the dynamics of their armor is a little tiny different, but not so noticeable that it will be a bad conversion or a bad proxy. So I definitely go with the Galadrim Warriors for $24.75. Which is a box of 12 of them. This is a lot better of an option than getting $100 worth of Mirkwood elves. Not to mention, also as Alex mentioned, they are fine cast, the new ones are. So why not go for the plastic guys, whom not only are easy to paint, but very durable as well, and still lighter than metal. So if you want to get something other than the Mirkwood Cav, then of course the answer is once again obvious, Galadrim Knights. Galadrim Knights are going to be only $7 more than your Mirkwood Cav, but come with 4 more models than the Mirkwood Cav do, and once again, not in fine cast. However, if you really, really want to be ambitious, then we could go into other ranges of Games Workshop. We've done so in other videos, so why not here? The Glade Riders, you get 10 of these guys from the Wood Elf Warriors in the Fantasy series. 10 of them for $35. Honestly, if you separate them out and have some extra 40 mil bases, then these guys don't do too bad. Yes, you might want to touch them up a little bit. They're a bit more naked than their Wood Elf versions. The versions for the Lord of the Rings. But it's really not a bad look for what you're trying to achieve. And I have seen a lot of fantasy models painted in such a way that it's not so cartoony anymore. So if you're worried about that aesthetics, it really isn't difficult. You might even see some of my other videos for that. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a conversion where they made it look a little more gritty, but it's certainly possible. Then, so if you really, really, really want to get elaborate, a lot of people have actually been screaming for a Thranduil on an elk. And I don't know why Games Workshop hasn't created one of these, because there already is one that exists. If you go for the Wild Riders for the Fantasy series, then you're going to find they also have a cheaper. It's $37 for 5 of these guys. But it's a cheaper option than the Mirkwood Cav still. So if, let's say you just want to be unique, say you don't want to get the Glade Riders because you're like, I don't really, it seems like a cheesy buy. Well, get the Wild Riders, and then you can have these Elk Cavalry following along with, and if you could convert it up, an Elk Thranduil later on in the road. I think this kind of conversion would be a lot easier than what I believe UK Freddy Bear made, this picture here that you'll see. He actually made a conversion. It's a gorgeous conversion. He did it for the GBHL. I want to say it was either him or Deadmar Spectre, one of the Shadow and Flame crew. You should definitely check them out. And so that would just be kind of an easy way to go about that. Either way, both the Wild Riders, the Glade Riders, or the Galadrim Knights are all cheaper options than the Mirkwood Cavalry. And so, hey, you should definitely pick any one of those. The next option I would definitely say, if you're trying to just get captain models, I certainly would never buy a single captain under the Palace Guard or the Mirkwood Elves. It's just not worth it. They look so similar to their actual warrior counterparts, you can't even tell the difference. I remember getting these guys, putting them next to my other Rangers after painted. I actually lost my captain several times during a game because I couldn't tell who was who. So my captain ended up basically teleporting as I accidentally thought that it was a different model. So you definitely shouldn't get these guys at all. If you're going to get a captain model, just paint one of the guys different, or in my opinion, get Wood Elf Sentinels. $15 gives you 3 guys who are extremely unique and still have that Mirkwood feel to them. So I really think that these are a much better option. In fact, I would say even if you're not on a budget, don't ever buy the captain models. It's just not worth it whatsoever. And now, if you're going to do the old 3-in-1 King of Mirkwood, then you might as well go ahead and do the Wood Elf Warriors. You might as well go Old Mirkwood. Now, obviously we're done our portion where we're like, okay, what are you going to do to try to get the new Mirkwood? But the old Mirkwood still are viable in your army. Now, these Wood Elf Warriors don't really proxy for anything very well in the new Mirkwood. I wouldn't say that they could proxy for Rangers. A lot of people would instantly clamor toward that, but unfortunately Rangers are all armed with bows and have these very dynamic poses. You could do that with these guys. Well, a third of your guys are going to come with spears, which of course Mirkwood Rangers don't have. And then the swords are all wielded in this two-handed manner that you really wouldn't see the Rangers with. But then again, we've been doing proxies all video, so sure. I guess if you bought a pack of these, you could take the bowmen and just say that there are 4 Rangers that you happen to have along with you. This isn't too bad an idea. Of course, you'll need another captain model to lead them, which might become a problem, but you could do it. I would absolutely recommend any of these options. Now, to make a list with these guys, I guess you can just do like maybe 2 Gladron Warrior boxes, which would get you the main group of Mirkwood elves. You can actually take the Spearmen and say that they are Palace Guard, so any of them will actually be good Palace Guard for you. You can do 3-in-1 King of Mirkwood, the $12 pack, and maybe just throw in a Tariel model. It might go a little bit above, or actually Wood Elf Sentinels, and then you can use one of the Sentinels as Legolas, maybe the one with the bow. So that would be one list for you. I mean, there's many ways to make this list, and I could have another 10 minutes on how to do all kinds of lists for the game, but I'm not going to go ahead and do that. I think it's pretty obvious. You're going to have to proxy most of this army in order to play it very cheaply. So, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know in the comment section below if you wanted me to add anything to future how to play videos, or if you think I missed anything regarding this faction. And also let me know what army you want me to do next. I know there has been a asking for Mordor. We can certainly cover that in a future video. And actually, I might split them in half in some way. Mordor is a faction that owns an entire book, unlike any other army. So it's actually really, really sizable, but who knows, maybe we'll just do it all in one really, really lengthy video. Otherwise than that, if you guys are interested in any other, I'm actually kind of interested in some of these newer armies, such as Lake Town, Goblin Town, stuff like that. But just let me know in the comment section below. Until then, thanks for watching.